The pen scratched against the paper like a knife through her heart. Christmas Eve, snow falling outside. A pregnant woman sitting at a table surrounded by people who despised her. They handed her divorce papers and $15,000 to disappear. They called her trash. They called her a gold digger. They burned her baby's first ultrasound picture in the fireplace and laughed about it. She signed those papers with tears streaming down her face. She walked out into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on her back. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed her completely.
I believe this evidence speaks for itself.
But here is what they did not know.
We are no
the
longer
waitress they
negotiating
threw
the
out like
terms.
garbage, she was the secret daughter of a billionaire. And by the time they discovered the truth, she would take everything from them. Their money, their company, their freedom. This is not a story about revenge. This is a story about a woman who lost everything and built an empire from the ashes. Stay until the end. Trust me, you will not see the final twist coming. The scratching of the pen against paper was the loudest sound Sarah Mitchell had ever heard. It echoed through the Thornton estate dining room like a scream, bouncing off the crystal chandelier that hung above the mahogany table, reflecting in the wine glasses that sparkled with vintage Merlot. 23 candles flickered in their silver holders, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the people who were about to destroy her life. Sarah sat at the end of the table, her hands folded in her lap, her green dress suddenly feeling cheap against the velvet cushion of her chair. She had bought that dress on sale at a department store 3 weeks ago, excited to look nice for Christmas dinner with her husband's family. She had not known then that she would be wearing it to her own execution. Victoria Thornton sat at the head of the table like a queen surveying her kingdom. At 62 years old, she had the kind of beauty that money could buy and cruelty could preserve. Her silver hair was swept back in an elegant twist, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight, her lips painted the color of old blood. She had never liked Sarah. That much had been clear from the moment Derek brought her home 3 years ago, a paralegal from a small law firm, a former foster kid who had worked her way through community college. Victoria had looked at her like she was something scraped off the bottom of an expensive shoe. But Sarah had thought that time would change things. She had thought that if she was kind enough, patient enough, loving enough, the Thorntons would eventually accept her. She had been wrong. Derek sat to his mother's right, her husband of 3 years, the man who had swept her off her feet in a coffee shop when his Porsche broke down in her neighborhood. He had been different then, charming, rebellious. He had told her that his family's money did not define him, that he wanted a simple life, a real love. Now he would not even look at her. His sister Madison sat across from him, scrolling through her phone with manicured fingers, already bored with the proceedings. At 29, Madison Thornton had 500,000 Instagram followers in the emotional depth of a puddle. She had called Sarah trash to her face more times than Sarah could count. And Gerald Walsh, the family lawyer, sat at the far end of the table, a manila envelope in front of him like a weapon waiting to be deployed. He had been with the Thorntons for 20 years. Sarah had always felt uneasy around him, though she could never explain why. Victoria set down her wine glass with a deliberate clink. "Sarah, dear," she said, her voice dripping with that distinctive mixture of politeness and venom she had perfected over 6 decades. "I notice you are not drinking wine tonight. Finally developed some class, or just cannot afford to contribute a bottle?" Madison snickered behind her hand. "Mom, do not be rude. Not everyone grew up learning which fork to use." Sarah felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her cheeks. She looked at Derek, waiting for him to defend her the way he used to. He continued staring at his plate, cutting his roast goose with surgical precision. "Actually," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I have some news I wanted to share with everyone." Victoria cut her off with a wave of her hand. "We have news too." "Gerald?" The lawyer slid the manila envelope across the polished table. It glided smoothly, coming to rest directly in front of Sarah's untouched dinner plate. "Divorce papers," Gerald said, his voice flat and professional. "Pre-negotiated settlement. $15,000 and you walk away tonight." The words did not make sense at first. Sarah stared at the envelope like it was a foreign object, something from another planet that had accidentally landed in front of her. "I learned something that night that I want every woman to know. When someone ambushes you with legal documents, never sign anything on the spot. Not if they were crying, not if they are threatening, not if they say it is your only chance. The pressure is a tactic. A legitimate offer will still be there tomorrow. But I did not know that then. All I knew was that my world was falling apart. Derek, Sarah whispered, you are really doing this? On Christmas Eve? Derek finally looked up. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying before dinner. But there was no warmth in them now, only exhaustion and resignation. It is not working, Sarah. You do not fit in here. You never did. This is for the best. For the best? Sarah's voice cracked. After 3 years of marriage? After everything we have been through? Victoria sighed dramatically. Must we do this the hard way? Gerald explained the terms. Gerald cleared his throat. The settlement includes a one-time payment of $15,000. In exchange, you waive all claims to spousal support, marital assets, and any future inheritance. Clean break. No contest. Sarah's mind raced. $15,000. Her apartment lease had ended when she moved in with Derek. She had $43 in her personal bank account. Her foster parents, the only family she had ever known, had passed away 2 years ago. She had nothing. She had no one. And then she remembered. Actually, Sarah said, her voice stronger now, there is something you should know before I sign anything. The table went silent. Even Madison looked up from her phone. I am pregnant. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Victoria's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Derek's fork clattered against his plate. Madison's mouth fell open. I found out 3 days ago, Sarah continued, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. I was going to tell you tonight. Surprise! Derek stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You are lying. You are just saying that to manipulate us. I have the test. I have the blood work from my doctor. I am 8 weeks along. Victoria recovered first. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, but her voice remained steady. How convenient. Gerald, does this change anything legally? Gerald shifted uncomfortably. It complicates custody matters, but if she signs voluntarily and accepts the settlement, she waives spousal support. The pregnancy does not void that. Madison rolled her eyes. Can we speed this up? I have a party at 9. Sarah looked at Derek, searching his face for some trace of the man she had married. The man who had kissed her in the rain, who had sworn he loved her simplicity, who had promised that his family's opinions would never matter more than their love. Derek, she pleaded, this is your child. Our child. Does that mean nothing to you? Derek looked at his mother. Victoria gave him an almost imperceptible nod. He straightened his tie and sat back down. Take the money, Sarah. Sign the papers. Do not make a scene. I made a choice that night that I will regret forever. But I want you to understand why I made it, so you never make the same mistake. I had no money, no home to go back to, and a baby growing inside me. They offered $15,000. It felt like a fortune. It felt like survival. I did not know then what I know now. I was worth so much more. Not because of money, because I had rights I signed away with my own hand. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the envelope. Inside were 3 copies of a divorce settlement. Standard, cold, brutal, irreconcilable differences. Waiver of spousal support. Lump sum payment of $15,000. She picked up the pen. A tear fell onto the paper, blurring the ink slightly. You will regret this, she said quietly. All of you will. Doubtful, Victoria replied, lifting her wine glass in a mock toast. Gerald will have a car take you to a hotel. Collect your things from the guest house tomorrow. Security will supervise. Sarah signed her name, Sarah Mitchell Thornton, the last time she would ever write those words. She stood up. With as much dignity as she could muster, she walked toward the massive oak doors of the dining hall. Thank God, Madison said in a loud whisper. Now we can finally have a real Christmas. Sarah stopped at the door. She turned around one last time, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Victoria's triumph, Madison's contempt, Gerald's indifference, and Derek who still would not look at her. Merry Christmas, Madison, Sarah said, her voice steady now. I hope you get everything you deserve. She walked out into the snow. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the sound of their laughter. And Sarah Mitchell stood alone in the darkness, 8 weeks pregnant, with $15,000 promised to her account and nowhere in the world to go. The promised car never came. Sarah waited at the end of the long Thornton driveway for 20 minutes, her thin green dress offering no protection against the 15-degree temperature. Snow fell steadily, coating her hair, melting on her cheeks like frozen tears. She realized with a sickening certainty that there had never been any intention of sending a car. This was Victoria's final cruelty. Throw the trash out and let it freeze. Sarah pulled out her phone. The battery showed 8%. She scrolled through her contacts with numb fingers. Derek Thornton, husband, no. Linda from work. It was Christmas Eve. Nobody would answer. Mom Foster, deceased. Dad Foster, deceased. She stopped on one name she had not called in 10 years. A name she had saved but promised herself she would never use. Dad bio, do not call. I should tell you about that contact. When I was 16, I tracked down my biological father. I was a foster kid, bounced around 6 homes, and I thought finding my real family would fix everything. His name was Richard Blackwood. He was rich, seriously rich, and when I showed up at his office in my thrift store clothes, clutching the DNA test I had saved up for, he looked at me like I was dirt. He said, I do not know what scam you are running, but I do not have a daughter. Security will escort you out. I never contacted him again. I pretended he did not exist. I told myself I did not need him. But standing in that snow, 8 weeks pregnant with nowhere to go, I stared at his name on my phone. Sarah's finger hovered over the call button. The phone died. Of course, she laughed bitterly at the sky. Of course. She started walking. 3 miles to the nearest gas station. In heels. In a dress meant for a heated dining room, not a Connecticut blizzard. By the time she reached the Quick Mart, her lips were blue and she could no longer feel her feet. The fluorescent lights inside felt like heaven. Tinny Christmas music played from speakers in the ceiling. A teenager behind the counter looked up from his phone, his eyes widening. Holy. Ma'am, are you okay? His name tag read Jalen. He was maybe 19, with kind eyes and a concerned expression that felt more genuine than anything Sarah had experienced in the past 3 hours. Can I use your phone? Sarah managed through chattering teeth. Mine died. Yeah, of course. Here. He handed her his phone. Sarah stared at the screen, her frozen brain struggling to function. She did not know anyone's number by heart. Everything was saved in her contacts. Her friends, her coworkers, her entire support network, all locked away in a dead device. I do not know any numbers, she admitted, the words coming out like a confession. Memorize 3 phone numbers. I am serious. Your mom, your best friend, and a lawyer. It sounds old-fashioned, but when your phone dies, when your world collapses, those 10 digits might be all that stands between you and the street. That is rough, Jalen said. You want me to call someone? Police? Hospital? No police. I just need to think. Sarah sank down to the floor by the coffee station. Jalen disappeared for a moment, then returned with a steaming cup. Hot chocolate, he said, handing it to her. On the house, you look like you need it more than the register does. Sarah took the cup. The warmth spread through her frozen fingers, and something broke inside her ear. She started crying, not delicate tears, but ugly, messy sobbing. 8 weeks pregnant and weeping on the floor of a gas station on Christmas Eve. The door chimed. A man stumbled in wearing a full Santa suit, clearly drunk and coming from a party somewhere. He spotted Sarah on the floor, looked at Jalen, looked back at Sarah. Ho ho, oh no, he slurred, hiccuping. Did I do something? I did not do anything yet. Dude, just get your Red Bull and go, Jalen said. The drunk Santa reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. He dropped it in Sarah's lap. Merry Christmas, lady. Whatever he did, he is not worth it. Men are trash. I would know. He thumped his chest proudly. I am trash. He stumbled out into the snow, leaving Sarah holding a $20 bill, half laughing and half crying at the absurdity of it all. Jalen sat down on the floor beside her, keeping a respectful distance. You want to talk about it? He asked. My husband's family just made me sign divorce papers at Christmas dinner, Sarah said, the words tumbling out. I am pregnant. They do not know. Well, they know now. I told them right before I signed. They did not care. They gave me $15,000 to disappear. And then they did not even send a car. Jalen whistled low. That is cold. Literally and figuratively. I have nowhere to go. My foster parents are dead. My friends are not really friends. And my biological father, Sarah, laughed bitterly. The one time I met him, he had security throw me out. Okay, Jalen said slowly. So tonight is rough, but tomorrow's different. You know about St. Mary's, the shelter? My cousin works there. It is open on Christmas. They help women in exactly your situation. You could stay here tonight. The back office has a couch. In the morning, I will drive you over. Sarah looked at this teenager, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than her husband's family had shown her in 3 years. Why would you help me? She asked. You do not even know me. Jalen shrugged. My mom was in a shelter once. When I was little, someone helped her. Seems like the kind of thing you pay forward, you know? Sarah spent the night on a lumpy couch in the back office of a Quick Mart, covered by Jalen's spare jacket, with a dead phone and a broken heart. But she was warm. She was safe. And for the first time since the dinner began, she felt something other than despair. She felt grateful. For hot chocolate, for a $20 bill from a drunk Santa, for a teenager who understood that kindness did not require a reason. In the morning, Jalen drove her to St. Mary's Women's Shelter. The director met her at the door. She was a black woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen everything but still managed to convey warmth. Sarah Mitchell, she said without preamble. Paralegal, 8 weeks pregnant. Signed divorce papers under duress last night. That about cover it? Sarah blinked. How did you know? The woman smiled. Honey, I have been running this shelter for 15 years. Your story is not unique. That is not an insult. It is a promise. If I have seen it 100 times, I know how to fight it 100 ways. My name is Doreen Washington. Welcome to St. Mary's. Doreen told me something that first morning that changed my life. She said the papers you signed are not set in stone. Contracts signed under duress, coercion, or fraud can be challenged. You just need 3 things: evidence, time, and someone meaner than they are. I asked her where I would find someone meaner than Victoria Thornton. She smiled and said, you are looking at her. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, Sarah allowed herself to hope. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in the community room of St. Mary's Shelter, surrounded by legal documents and yellow legal pads covered in her handwriting. The room had been converted into her makeshift office. A folding table served as her desk. A borrowed laptop displayed public records searches. Doreen had gotten her a temporary position at a legal aid office, $12 an hour, but it was enough to keep her mind occupied and her skills sharp. Because Sarah was not just surviving anymore. She was building a case. When you are at rock bottom, the instinct is to curl up and hide. I get it, but I want you to remember this. Your skills do not disappear just because your life fell apart. I was a paralegal. I knew how to research. I knew how to find information. And I had 8 months before my baby came. That was my timeline. 8 months to build a case, find leverage, and get what my child deserved. She had found plenty of interesting information about the Thorntons. Public records showed that Thornton Holdings was over-leveraged, $15 million in debt despite their outward appearance of wealth. There was a lawsuit from 5 years ago that had been quietly settled, something about sexual harassment that the company had paid to make disappear. Madison's Instagram post showed luxury items that did not match the company's financial struggles, suggesting someone was hiding money. But she had no proof. No smoking gun, just circumstantial evidence and suspicion. Doreen walked in with 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from Sarah. You need someone on the inside, Doreen said, sliding a cup toward her. I was on the inside for 3 years. Nobody talked to me except to insult me. Not the family. Doreen's eyes were knowing. The staff, the driver, the housekeeper, the people they treat like furniture. Sarah froze. She thought of Elena Morales, the Thornton housekeeper. Elena had been with the family for 12 years. She had a daughter in college. She could not afford to lose her job, but she had also been the only person in that house who had ever shown Sarah kindness. Small things, an extra blanket when the guest house was cold, a warm smile when everyone else looked through her like glass. Elena, Sarah said slowly, the housekeeper. She saw everything. Then she is where you start. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a booth at a diner in Hartford, waiting. She had sent Elena a message through a mutual acquaintance, a woman from church who knew both of them. She had asked for just 15 minutes. A conversation, nothing more. Elena arrived looking nervous, her eyes darting around the diner like she expected Victoria Thornton to materialize from thin air. "Mrs. Sarah," Elena said, sliding into the booth. "I should not be here. If they find out I talked to you, Elena, they burned my baby's ultrasound. They threw me out in the snow on Christmas Eve. I am not asking you to testify. I am just asking you to tell me what you have seen." "Off the record." Elena's hands twisted in her lap. She looked like a woman at war with herself. "My daughter," Elena whispered. "She is in her junior year. Pre-med. If I lose this job, I understand. I am not asking you to risk your livelihood. I just need to know if what I suspect is true. Is there something going on at that company? Something Victoria is hiding?" Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, her voice barely audible. "The safe in Mr. Gerald's office. The combination is Mrs. Thornton's birthday. August 8th, 1962. I have seen him put things in there late at night. Things Mrs. Thornton tells him to make disappear. Company papers, I think." Sarah's heart raced. "Financial records. Proof of embezzlement. There is something else," Elena continued, her voice even quieter. "The night Mr. Derek's father died. Heart attack, they said. But I heard Mrs. Thornton and Gerald talking afterward. About the dosage. And making sure the doctor does not ask questions." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You think Victoria killed her husband?" "I do not know what I think. Maybe it is nothing. But it always bothered me. Mr. Thornton Sr. was healthy. He played tennis every morning. And then one night, just gone." Elena stood up abruptly. "I have told you too much. Please, Mrs. Sarah, do not tell anyone where you got this information. I would never." "Elena, thank you. You do not know what this means." Elena paused at the door. "I know exactly what it means. Be careful. Victoria Thornton is not just cruel. She is dangerous." She left, and Sarah sat alone in the booth, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. If Victoria had killed her own husband, there was no limit to what she might do to protect her secrets. Sarah was not just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting against a woman capable of murder. But she was also fighting for her child, and that made her dangerous too. The plan came together over the next 2 weeks. The Thorntons hosted an annual New Year's Eve gala at their estate. 200 guests, catering staff, security focused on the main event. Gerald's office would be unattended. Jalen's cousin worked for a catering company. He could get Sarah a uniform. Doreen had connections who could provide a cover story if anything went wrong. It was risky. It was possibly illegal. It was absolutely necessary. On New Year's Eve, Sarah Mitchell walked through the service entrance of the Thornton estate wearing a white catering uniform and carrying a tray of champagne glasses. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The mansion glittered with decorations, crystal and gold, and imported flowers that cost more than her monthly salary at the legal aid office. The Thorntons' guests laughed and drank and celebrated, oblivious to the woman in the uniform who was about to steal their host's darkest secrets. Sarah waited until the toast at 11:30. When all eyes were on Victoria's performance of gracious hostess, she slipped away from the party and made her way to Gerald's office. The door was unlocked. The safe was behind a painting of the Connecticut countryside, Victoria's birthday. Victoria, August 8th, 1962. The lock clicked open. Inside, Sarah found exactly what she was looking for: financial documents showing $2.3 million embezzled over 10 years. A USB drive, a burner phone with text messages between Gerald and Madison, explicit messages that proved their affair. She photographed everything. She pocketed the USB drive. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped her phone twice. She made it out of the office and nearly collided with Derek in the hallway. "Sarah?" His face registered shock, then confusion, then something like fear. "What are you doing here?" "Derek, let me go. You are trespassing. My mother will call the police." "Your mother had my baby's ultrasound burned. She threw me out in a snowstorm. So go ahead. Call the police. But know this, I have evidence now. Evidence of what Gerald and your mother have been doing to this company. And if you do not step aside in the next 5 seconds, every news outlet in Connecticut will have it by morning." Derek stared at her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. The man she had fallen in love with. The man who had once promised to protect her from exactly this kind of cruelty. The service exit is down the hall, he said quietly. Security changes shift in 3 minutes. He stepped aside. Sarah ran. At the door, she stopped and turned back. Why, she asked. Because I am a coward, Derek said, his voice hollow. But I am not a monster. Take care of the baby. She disappeared into the night, clutching evidence that could destroy the Thornton empire. She had won. Finally, she had won. Or so she thought. January 15th, 2 weeks after the heist. Sarah sat in Doreen's office at St. Mary's, surrounded by legal documents. With Doreen's connections, she had filed 3 motions with the court. A motion to void the divorce settlement on grounds of duress. A claim for rightful spousal support. A custody filing establishing her parental rights to her unborn child. The Thorntons had received the papers 2 days ago. Victoria's response was swift, brutal, and unexpected. A knock at the door of Sarah's tiny studio apartment came at 6 in the morning. She had just finished her first cup of decaf coffee, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly. 10 weeks pregnant now. The morning sickness had finally started to fade. She opened the door to find 2 police officers. Sarah Mitchell, the first officer said, you are under arrest for theft, trespassing, and corporate espionage. What? Sarah's blood ran cold. No, I did not steal anything. I just took photos. Ma'am, we have a sworn statement from Gerald Walsh and surveillance footage. You will need to come with us. They handcuffed her. Her neighbors watched from their doorways as she was led to the police car. The humiliation burned worse than the metal digging into her wrists. I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me. If you are ever arrested, say these exact words. I want a lawyer. I am invoking my right to remain silent. Then shut up. Do not explain. Do not defend yourself. Do not say, but I was just. Every word you say can and will be twisted. I talked. I tried to explain. And every single thing I said was used against me. 6 hours later, Sarah sat in an interrogation room at the county jail. She was exhausted, terrified, and 10 weeks pregnant. The door opened. Gerald Walsh walked in. He was not there as a lawyer. He was there as a witness, offering to help. Sarah, this does not have to be difficult, Gerald said, sitting across from her with an expression of false concern. The Thorntons are prepared to drop all charges. All you have to do is sign this statement recanting your claims against them, withdraw your custody filing, and agree to supervised visitation only. Supervised visitation? For my own child? The alternative is a trial. Gerald leaned forward, his voice dropping. And Sarah, I have to be honest with you. We have surveillance footage of you breaking into my office. We have your fingerprints on the safe. The USB drive, it is encrypted. You cannot access anything on it without the password. Your photos? They could be doctored. Any expert we hire will say so. He slid a paper across the table. You are 10 weeks pregnant, facing felony charges, with no money for a real lawyer. The public defender you will get handles 200 cases a month. Do you really think they will prioritize you? Sign the paper, Sarah. Take whatever access to your child you can get. Because if you fight this, you will lose everything, including the baby. Sarah stared at the paper. Gerald was right. She had no money. She had no power. The evidence she had stolen was useless without the encryption password. Her hand reached for the pen. Here is what I thought about in that moment. I thought about my baby, not just as an abstract idea, but as a real person who would grow up and ask questions. Mommy, why did you give up? Mommy, why did you not fight for me? I decided right then that even if I lost, even if I went to prison, my child would know that their mother went down swinging. Sometimes that is all the strength you have, the strength to make sure your kids never see you quit. No, Sarah said. Gerald blinked. Excuse me? I said no. Get me my lawyer, my real lawyer. And Gerald, whatever you are hiding in those encrypted files, I am going to find out. And when I do, I am going to destroy you. Gerald's mask of false concern slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and reptilian underneath. Then he stood, gathered his papers, and left without another word. 2 hours later, a guard appeared at Sarah's holding cell. Mitchell, you made bail. Someone is here for you. Sarah walked to the release area on shaking legs. She had not called anyone. Doreen did not have that kind of money. Who would possibly post bail for her? A man stood in the lobby, tall, silver-haired, expensive suit, cold eyes. He looked like the kind of man who made economies tremble and politicians sweat. Sarah Mitchell, he said. It was not a question. Who are you? My name is Richard Blackwood. According to a DNA test you had done 16 years ago, I am your biological father. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She remembered standing in his office at 16 clutching that DNA test, so full of hope. She remembered the security guards escorting her out. She remembered crying on the bus home, vowing never to contact him again. And now here he was, 16 years too late. You said you did not have a daughter, Sarah said, her voice hard. You had security throw me out. I know what I said. So why are you here now? Did you see me on the news? Cited it as bad PR to have your biological daughter in county jail? Richard was silent for a moment. Then he gestured toward the door. My car's outside. We should talk. The Bentley was warm and smelled of expensive leather. Sarah sat as far from Richard as the back seat would allow. 3 weeks ago, Richard said, staring out the window, I had a heart attack. Mild, but enough to make a man think about his legacy. I have no other children, no heirs. My wife passed 5 years ago. I am 68 years old, and I am worth $1.2 billion. And the only family I have is a daughter I threw away because I was too arrogant to believe she was real. So now you want to play dad? After 32 years? No, I am not that naive. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect a relationship. But I can offer you something practical. Resources, lawyers, investigators, the tools to fight Victoria Thornton and win. Why would you help me? Richard turned to look at her for the first time. His eyes, Sarah realized, were the same shade of gray as her own. Because I looked into Victoria Thornton. She is a predator. She preys on people she thinks are weak. I have dealt with her type my entire career. And frankly, a small smile crossed his face. You standing up to her in that interrogation room, I saw the security footage, reminded me of your mother. She never backed down from anyone either. You knew my mother? That is a conversation for another time. For now, focus on your war. Do you accept my help? Here is what I learned about accepting help when you are desperate. You do not have to forgive someone to work with them. You do not have to trust someone completely to use their resources strategically. And you do not have to pretend a complicated relationship is simple. I never called Richard dad. I never pretended we were a happy family. But I used every single resource he offered to protect my child. Sometimes survival is not pretty. It is practical. I accept your resources, Sarah said finally. Not your money, not your name. We are not family, Mr. Blackwood. We are allies, for now. Richard nodded with something like respect. Fair enough. The next 2 months were a blur of activity. Richard's team was formidable. Marcus Sullivan, a private investigator and former FBI agent, dug into the Thorntons with ruthless efficiency. Diane Ross, a shark of a divorce attorney who had never lost a custody case, filed motion after motion. A tech team worked around the clock to crack the encryption on the USB drive. By March, Sarah was 16 weeks pregnant. The criminal charges against her had been dropped due to insufficient evidence. Richard's lawyers had buried Gerald's case so deep it would never see daylight. The divorce settlement had been voided. She was owed proper spousal support. And then came the settlement offer. The mediation room was neutral territory, a conference room in a Hartford law office with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. Victoria sat on one side of the long table, flanked by Derek, Gerald, and Madison. Sarah sat on the other side with Diane and Marcus. Richard attended via video call on a laptop. Victoria looked different, older, diminished, like a woman who had finally met an opponent she could not simply crush. We are prepared to settle, Victoria said, her voice tired. $2 million, full custody for Sarah. Derek gets supervised visitation 1 weekend a month. The Thorntons will make no further contact. Sarah's heart leaped. $2 million, full custody. It was everything she had fought for. Diane leaned over and whispered, "This is a good deal, Sarah. Better than we expected." Sarah studied Victoria's face. Something felt wrong. Victoria Thornton did not surrender. She did not give up control. Why would she offer everything? Why, Sarah asked aloud. Why would you give me everything? Because I am old, Victoria replied. Because fighting you is exhausting. Because Derek has not stopped drinking since Christmas. Just take the money and leave us alone. Sarah looked at Derek. He did look terrible. Unshaven, bloodshot eyes, hands trembling slightly. The weight of the past months had clearly broken something in him. Please, Sarah, Derek said, his voice cracking. Just take it. End this. I cannot keep doing this. Sarah hesitated. Diane was nodding. Marcus was nodding. Even Richard on the video call said it seemed like a reasonable offer. Okay, Sarah said, reaching for the pen. I will sign. Her fingers had just touched the paper when Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His face went white. Stop. Do not sign anything. What? Why? I just got word from the tech team. They cracked the encryption on that USB drive. You need to see what is on it. Now, Gerald stood up quickly. This is highly irregular. The mediation should continue. Is paused. Diane cut in smoothly. My client needs to review new evidence. Marcus turned his laptop towards Sarah. The files from the USB drive were displayed on the screen. Financial records, email chains, text messages. And then Sarah saw it. A payment to a pharmacist, falsified medical records, a text conversation between Victoria and Gerald from 10 years ago. You poisoned him, Sarah breathed, the horror creeping into her voice. Victoria's expression did not change. I do not know what you were talking about. Derek's father? The heart attack? There is a payment here to a pharmacist, falsified medical records, and a text conversation between you and Gerald from that night. Sarah read aloud, It is done. Make sure the doctor signs off on natural causes. The room exploded. What? Derek shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. Mom, what is she talking about? Sit down, Derek. Victoria's voice was ice. Did you kill Dad? The mask finally dropped. Victoria's face transformed from exhausted surrender to something cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. Your father was going to divorce me. He was going to leave everything to some 22-year-old waitress he had been sleeping with. I did what I had to do to protect this family. To protect you. Derek staggered backward like he had been physically struck. His entire reality was crumbling before his eyes. Mom, shut up, Madison shrieked. You are incriminating yourself. Victoria ignored her daughter. Her eyes were locked on Sarah. It does not matter. We have recordings too, Sarah. Recordings from your little shelter. Your friend Doreen, one of her volunteers, has been reporting to us for months. We know about your father. We know about the USB drive. And we know about your medical records. Victoria smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Sarah had ever seen. You have a heart condition, do you not? Hereditary, high-risk pregnancy. If we drag this to trial, the stress alone might cause complications. Sarah's hand flew to her stomach. You would endanger my baby? To win? I would do anything to win. I always have. Now, shall we renegotiate? That night, Sarah collapsed. The stress of the mediation, the revelation about the murder, Victoria's threat against her baby, it was too much. Her body simply gave out. She woke up in a hospital bed, hooked to monitors that beeped steadily in the dim room. Doreen sat beside her, holding her hand. Richard stood by the window, his face grave. The doctor's verdict was devastating. Stress-induced contractions at 16 weeks. She needed complete bed rest. Minimal stress. Any significant emotional or physical strain could trigger early labor. We can still fight, Sarah, Doreen said gently. Victoria admitted to murder on tape. We have witnesses, and a trial that could take years. Sarah's voice cracked. Years of stress, years of fighting. While my baby. She could not finish the sentence. I can handle the legal fight, Richard said. You do not have to be in the courtroom. I want to be in the courtroom, Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. I want to watch her face when they take her away in handcuffs. I want her to know that I did this. Me. The trash she threw out in the snow. She broke down completely. Why do I have to choose? Why can I not have both? My baby and my justice. Here is the hardest lesson I learned. Sometimes you cannot have everything. Sometimes you have to choose between revenge and your future, between being right and being at peace. I spent weeks in that hospital bed thinking I was giving up. But I was not giving up. I was choosing. I was choosing my son over my anger. And that choice, that specific choice, is the thing I am most proud of in my entire life. 3 weeks later, Sarah made her decision. She called Diane from her hospital bed. I want to offer Victoria a deal. A deal? Diane's voice was incredulous. Sarah, we have her for murder, I know. And I want you to offer her this. She pleads guilty to fraud and embezzlement. 5 years in federal prison. Derek gets the company. It's all her money, but I get 30% of the shares in trust for my child. Victoria stays away from me and my baby forever. In exchange, we do not pursue the murder charge. She will never accept that. She will. Because if she does not, her son finds out the full details of how she killed his father. I saw Derek's face in that mediation room. He is barely holding on. If he learns the truth, all of it, he will destroy himself. Victoria is a monster, but she loves Derek in her twisted way. She will take the deal to protect him. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You are giving up your revenge to save the man who divorced you on Christmas Eve. I am giving up my revenge to save my baby's father. Those are different things. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat across from Victoria Thornton in a prison visitor room. Victoria had been arrested on fraud charges while the murder investigation proceeded. She wore an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes. Her hair was unstyled. She looked every one of her 62 years. Sarah was 20 weeks pregnant now. She had been released from the hospital with strict instructions to avoid stress. You look tired, Victoria said. I am tired. That is why I am here to end this. End it? You have me on murder charges. Why would you settle for anything less than watching me die in prison? Because I am not you, Victoria. Sarah slid the settlement agreement across the table. I do not need to destroy everything to feel like I have won. I just need my child to be safe. I need my child to have a future, and I need to never see your face again. Victoria picked up the document, scanning the terms. 5 years, fraud charges only. 30% of Thornton Holdings in trust for the baby. No contact, ever. And the murder investigation? Dropped. Insufficient evidence. You go to minimum security, you do your time, you get out in 3 years with good behavior. You will be 65. Still enough time to take up gardening. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Why are you doing this? You could have everything. I could have revenge. That is not the same as everything. I choose peace, Victoria. I choose my baby. I choose a life where I do not wake up every day thinking about you. That is worth more than watching you rot. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of an opponent who had proven worthy. I underestimated you, Victoria said slowly. From the very beginning. Yes, you did. Sign the paper. Victoria signed, and just like that, the war was over. Not with a dramatic courtroom victory or a triumphant speech. With a quiet agreement in a prison visiting room between two women who had learned exactly how much they were willing to sacrifice. Sarah walked out of the prison into the March sunshine. She placed her hand on her belly, where her son kicked gently, as if celebrating. She had not won everything, but she had won enough. She had won her freedom, her future, and her child. That would have to be enough. September. 8 months after the Christmas dinner that had destroyed her life. Sarah sat in the rocking chair of her new home, a modest but beautiful brownstone in a quiet Connecticut neighborhood. She had bought it with her settlement money. It had a small garden in the back, a kitchen that got morning light, and a nursery painted the soft blue of a summer sky. In her arms, she held her son, James Mitchell. Not Thornton, Mitchell. Her name, her legacy. He had been born 3 weeks ago, healthy and perfect, with 10 fingers and 10 toes and his father's stubborn chin. He had Sarah's gray eyes. She wondered if he would have her determination too. She hoped so. I named my son James after my foster father, the man who raised me when nobody else would. Not after Derek, not after Richard. I wanted my son to know that family is not about blood. Family is about who shows up, who fights for you, who loves you when there is nothing to gain from it. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She was not expecting anyone. Doreen was at the shelter. Elena, who had finally quit her job with the Thorntons and now worked for a nonprofit Doreen had started, was visiting her daughter at college. Jalen was in classes at the community college where Sarah had written him a recommendation letter. She opened the door, baby James cradled in one arm. Derek Thornton stood on her doorstep. He looked different than the last time she had seen him. Thinner, older, but somehow more present, more human. His eyes were clear, his hands were steady. "I know you said no contact," he began. "That was for your mother, not you. Come in." They sat in her living room. Derek could barely look at James. His eyes kept flickering to the baby and then away, as if the sight was too painful to hold. "He looks like you," Derek said finally. "He has your stubborn chin." Derek laughed, a small sad sound. "Poor kid. Why are you here, Derek?" Derek took a deep breath. "I spent the last 6 months in rehab. Alcohol and anxiety. Turns out finding out your mother killed your father does not do great things for your mental health. I am sorry. Sarah meant it. I did not want you to find out like that. I know, that is actually why I am here. I got access to all the company records when I took over. I found the original evidence from the USB drive. You had proof of everything. The murder, the embezzlement, all of it. You could have sent her away for life, but you made a deal. Yes, to protect me." Derek's voice cracked. "Even after everything I did to you, you protected me from the full truth." Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I did not do it for you, Derek. I did it for James. A father in prison is still a father. A father who drank himself to death because his mother was a murderer is nothing. That is a ghost. I wanted my son to have a living father, even if that father made terrible mistakes." Derek started crying. It was the kind of crying that came from years of holding everything in, deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. "I am so sorry, Sarah, for Christmas Eve, for not defending you, for being too weak to stand up to her. I know. I know you are sorry, and I forgive you." Derek looked up, his face wet with tears. "You do?" "I forgive you, Derek, but I will never forget, and I will never trust you like I did before. We can be co-parents. We can be civil. Maybe in time we can be friends, but we will never be what we were. Too much has happened. That is fair. That is more than fair. Can I?" He looked at James, his voice barely a whisper. "Can I hold him?" Sarah hesitated. This was the man who had handed her divorce papers on Christmas Eve. The man who had watched his family humiliate her for 3 years without saying a word. But he was also James's father, and her son deserved to know his father. She handed James to Derek. Derek held his son for the first time. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at this tiny person he had almost never known. "Hi, James," Derek whispered. "I am your dad. I am so sorry I was not there. I am going to do better. I promise." Sarah watched them together, and she realized that forgiveness was not a gift you gave other people. It was a gift you gave yourself. Forgiveness is not a gift you give other people. It is a gift you give yourself. Carrying hate is exhausting. It is a full-time job. And I did not have the energy anymore. Not with a newborn, not with a future to build. So I let it go. Not for Derek, for me, for my peace. For my son, October, 2 weeks after Derek's visit. Sarah was at the park with James, watching him sleep in his stroller under the golden autumn leaves when her phone rang. It was Diane. "Sarah, we have a problem. Victoria is out." "Out?" "She got 3 years. She has barely been in for 6 months. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Pancreatic. They released her on compassionate grounds. She has maybe 3 months." Sarah sat down on a park bench, stunned. Victoria Thornton, the woman who had seemed invincible, was dying. What does she want? "She has asked to see you, and Sarah, she has changed her will. She left everything, the remaining 70% of the company, the estate, all of it, to James. No, it is $200 million. I do not care. I do not want her money. I do not want anything from her. It is not for you. It is for James. In trust until he is 25. You do not have to accept it. But do you not think you should at least hear what she has to say?" Sarah stared at her sleeping son. $200 million. Enough to guarantee him a future beyond anything she could provide on her own. Enough to give him choices she had never had. But it was blood money. stolen, manipulated, earned on the backs of destroyed lives. What would James want, she wondered. When he was old enough to understand, would he want her to refuse on principle? Or would he want her to have at least listened? 2 days later, Sarah walked into Victoria's hospital room. The woman in the bed was barely recognizable. Frail, yellow-skinned, connected to machines that beeped and hummed. The predator who had thrown Sarah out into the snow was gone. In her place was something smaller, weaker, and terribly human. You came. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Against my better judgment. You have 5 minutes. I am dying. I heard. I am not going to pretend I am sad about it. Victoria laughed, which turned into a cough. I always liked that about you. You never faked anything. I faked everything. My whole life. Fake smiles, fake kindness, fake love. And look where it got me. Dying alone. My son can barely look at me. My daughter visits once a week out of obligation. And the only person who tells me the truth is the woman I tried to destroy. What do you want, Victoria? I want to apologize. Sarah said nothing. Not for the divorce. That was Derek's weakness. Not for the money. You never cared about that anyway. I want to apologize for the ultrasound. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. I burned your baby's first picture, Victoria continued. I did it to hurt you, to destroy something you loved. And of all the things I have done, that is the one I regret the most. Because I was a mother once too, and I remember what that picture meant. And I took that from you. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness exactly, but from something being released. A wound she had not realized she was still carrying. I left everything to James, Victoria said, not as an apology, as a second chance. He is my grandson, the only good thing to come out of all this mess. I want him to have options. I want him to have choices I never gave Derek. Will you let him have the money? Sarah was silent for a long moment. I will put it in trust. For education, for a home, for whatever he wants to do with his life. But I will also tell him where it came from, all of it, the good and the bad. He will know who you were, Victoria. The whole truth, that is all I ask, the whole truth. At least someone will remember me honestly. Sarah turned to leave. One more thing. Victoria's voice stopped her at the door. Your father, Richard Blackwood. What about him? We were engaged once, before he married his wife, before he met your mother. I broke it off because he was not rich enough. Is that not funny? The poorest decision I ever made, if I had married him. Married. You would have destroyed him too, Sarah said. Probably, but I want you to know why I hated you so much. It was not just the class thing. Every time I looked at you, I saw the life I could have had, the daughter I could have had, and I hated you for it. Sarah stared at her dying enemy, this woman who had caused her so much pain, this woman who had murdered her own husband and tried to destroy her son's mother, this woman who, in another life, might have been something entirely different. Goodbye, Victoria, Sarah said. I hope you find peace, I really do. She walked out of the hospital room and did not look back. Victoria Thornton died 3 weeks later. Sarah did not attend the funeral. But that night, alone in her kitchen after James was asleep, she lit a candle. For closure. For endings. For the woman her enemy might have been in a different life. Then she blew it out and went to bed. The past was finally past. December. James's first birthday. Sarah's brownstone was transformed. Streamers hung from the ceiling. A banner reading Happy First Birthday. James stretched across the living room. The smell of roasting turkey filled the air, mingling with cinnamon and pine. The house was full of people. Real people. People who had earned their place in Sarah's life through kindness and loyalty and love. Doreen Washington sat in the comfortable armchair by the fireplace. James's honorary grandmother, still running St. Mary's Shelter, but now with a full staff and proper funding. Elena Morales helped in the kitchen, having found her calling working with women in crisis. Jalen Brooks was in his second year of college, studying social work, wearing a sweater that Sarah had bought him for Christmas. Derek sat on the floor with James, building towers out of soft blocks and laughing when James knocked them down. He was sober now. Better. He visited every other weekend and was learning, slowly, how to be a father. And Richard Blackwood stood by the window, watching the snow fall outside. Still not dad. Maybe never dad, but present, learning, trying. He was currently attempting to assemble a toy truck that James had received as a gift. He was failing spectacularly. I built $1 billion company, Richard muttered, struggling with the instructions. I negotiated with foreign governments. Why can I not figure out tab A into slot B? Want me to YouTube it for you, sir? Jalen offered with a grin. In my day, toys came pre-assembled, Richard grumbled. In your day, toys were rocks and you were grateful, Doreen called from her armchair. I am not that old, Sarah laughed. You are a little that old. Richard finally cracked a smile. Fine, Jalen, YouTube it. Everyone gathered around the dining room table for dinner, the table that Sarah had bought at a thrift store and refinished herself, the table where she had eaten alone so many nights, wondering if she would ever feel whole again. Now it was surrounded by faces she loved. Sarah stood up, raising her glass of sparkling cider. 1 year ago tonight, I signed divorce papers in a room full of people who hated me. I walked out into a blizzard with nothing. No money, no home, no hope. She looked around the room at the people who had saved her. Tonight, I have a home. I have my son. I have people who love me. And I do not mean people who tolerate me or people who want something from me. I mean people who showed up when I had nothing to offer. People who believed in me when I did not believe in myself. She raised her glass higher. So here is to the gas station clerks who give out free hot chocolate. Here is to the shelter directors who fight for strangers. Here is to second chances, even for people who do not deserve them. And here is to family, not the one you are born into, but the one you build. To family, everyone echoed. Glasses clinked. Laughter filled the room. James smashed his tiny fist into his birthday cake, covering himself in frosting. And Sarah Mitchell looked at the life she had built from the ashes of the one that had been taken from her, and she smiled. If you are watching this and you feel like you are in your own snowstorm, kicked out, abandoned, told you are worthless, I want you to know something. This time next year, your life can be completely different. Not because some billionaire will rescue you. Maybe no one will rescue you, but you can rescue yourself. One step at a time, one kind stranger at a time, one decision at a time. Reach out, ask for help, accept it when it comes, even from imperfect people, and never ever let anyone make you sign something on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve, 2 years after the divorce. The birthday party was over. The guests had gone home. James was almost 2 now, toddling around the living room on sturdy legs, pointing at the Christmas tree lights and babbling happily. Sarah sat on the couch watching him, feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. Real, genuine peace. A knock at the door broke the silence. Sarah frowned. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Who would be visiting on Christmas Eve? She opened the door to find a young woman standing on her porch, mid-20s, nervous, clutching an envelope like it was a lifeline. Are you Sarah Mitchell? Yes. Can I help you? My name is Lily Parker. I was Gerald Walsh's secretary. Was Gerald Walsh. The name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She had not thought about him in months. Was, Sarah repeated. He died last week. Heart attack. I am sorry to hear that. She was not, really. Before he died, he gave me this. Lily held out the envelope with trembling hands. He said to bring it to you. He said it was the only good thing he could do with the time he had left. Sarah took the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Sarah, the note read, I was a coward my whole life. I did terrible things for terrible people, but I kept copies. Everything Victoria ever did, everything I helped cover up. Not just your case, dozens of cases, people she destroyed before you. Maybe you can give them closure. Maybe you can give their families answers. It will not make up for what I did, but maybe it is a start. Gerald. Sarah stared at the note for a long moment, then at the USB drive. How many people, she asked quietly. At least 30 families. Lily's eyes were wet. Victoria ruined them, stole their businesses, destroyed their reputations. Some of them did not survive it. Sarah thought about peace, about closure, about the promise she had made to herself to let it all go and move forward. Then she thought about 30 families who had never gotten answers. 30 families who had been destroyed the same way she almost was. 30 families who deserved to know the truth. She looked at James, still pointing at the Christmas lights, innocent and perfect and unaware of the darkness his mother had survived. What kind of world did she want him to grow up in? A world where people like Victoria Thornton could destroy lives without consequence, or a world where someone fought back? "Come inside, Lily," Sarah said. "It is cold." She closed the door against the December wind. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the streetlights with white. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed. "Doreen, it is Sarah. I need your help. I think we have work to do." Through the window, the snow continued to fall on the quiet street. Inside, James laughed at something only he could see. And Sarah Mitchell began planning her next battle. Not for revenge this time, for justice. That is my story, the real one. Not the fairy tale they tried to sell you. Not the waitress who married the prince and lived happily ever after. This is the story of a woman who fell and fell again and kept getting up. Because that is what you do. You get up. And eventually, you do not just survive. You win. Sarah Mitchell went on to found the Mitchell Foundation, a legal aid organization that has helped over 200 families recover assets stolen through fraud. She never remarried. She never needed to. She had her son, her purpose, and a family built not from blood, but from love. Some people said she was lucky that her biological father turned out to be a billionaire. But the people who knew her best understood the truth. The money had helped, yes, but it was not what saved her. What saved her was refusing to give up. What saved her was accepting help from strangers, from a teenager at a gas station who gave her hot chocolate, from a shelter director who taught her to fight, from imperfect people who showed up when she had nothing to offer in return. What saved her was understanding that being thrown into the snow on Christmas Eve was not the end of her story. It was just the beginning. And what about you? What is your beginning? Maybe you are in your own snowstorm right now. Maybe someone just handed you divorce papers, or fired you, or told you that you were not good enough. Maybe you are sitting on the floor of your own metaphorical gas station, wondering how you will survive until tomorrow. Here is what I want you to know. Tomorrow will come, and the day after that, and slowly, one day at a time, you will build something new, something stronger, something that is entirely yours. It will not be easy, it will not be fast, but it will happen if you refuse to stay down. So get up, ask for help, accept kindness when it is offered, and never let anyone make you sign away your worth. The snow is cold, but it does not last forever. Spring always comes. And that is how a woman they threw out in the snow on Christmas Eve became the one who brought them to their knees. But here's the real question I want to leave you with tonight. What would you have done? Would you have taken the revenge when you had the chance? Or would you have chosen peace like Sarah did? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story made you feel something, if it made you angry or hopeful, or reminded you that karma always finds a way, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach other people who need to hear it tonight. And if you are new here, welcome to the family. We tell stories about women who refuse to stay down, about justice served cold, about people who underestimate the wrong person. Hit subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss when the next story drops. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their story is not over yet. Thank you for staying until the end. I will see you in the next one.